Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we diving into the banned and restricted announcement that happened last week in MTG Arena. I know I'm a little bit late when it comes to this, but I figured I kind of, dive in, kind of see what the impact overall of these bans and how they kind of played out when it came to the overall metagame. With that being said, if you like the video, hit that like button. Definitely helps out a lot. If you're new here, want to know when I post new videos on the channel, hit that subscribe button. And with that being said, let's just dive into it and let's just talk about it. So last Tuesday, we got the announcement that there was some new bans and restrictions in Standard, Legacy, and Historic in MTG as a whole. Some of these were things that I feel like a lot of people had seen come in. I know there were some things that I know people haven't really seen happen in other formats, but I do think, like, let's just say in Standard, there are some things that got banned that I think deserve to be banned. One thing that was a surprise, and the other thing that I feel like is a net neutral when it comes to overall state of aggro decks overall in the meta game. With that being said, the first card that was banned was All Runs Epiphany. All Runs Epiphany was kind of this card that they talked about being a problem card overall in the format. With the announcement of Alchemy, they kind of already nerfed the card per se and making it as good as it was. It was a 7 mana, take an extra turn, create bird tokens. You can foretell it for 2 colorless and then play for 6 mana instead, still getting the birds. And the problem was that it made a lot of blue decks shift to actually playing All Runs Epiphany as a way to kind of finish out the game or turn the tides to kind of get a card in their favor. Is it decks were really prime here because it would copy the effect of Epiphany, taking multiple turns in a row, and essentially locking your opponent out from really ever being able to respond to a possible All Runs Epiphany unless they were, a fellow counter deck. But All Runs Epiphany kind of essentially dominated the overall metagame and the competitive scene as a whole. I know in Arena, for example, in Best of One, the deck was a thing, but it wasn't as, say, good as more of the aggro decks, and that's what happens in Best of One. Typically, it favors aggro over control, but in the Best of Three in competitive scene, Epiphany decks were all over the place just because of how good and, overall powerful the deck was and the spell was as well. The next card being kind of a surprise is the Divide by Zero, and this is kind of one of those things is like, I think a lot of people kind of didn't really see this being a possibility of being banned, as it being a 3 mana return target spell, permanent with a converted mana cost 1 or greater to its owner's hand, and learn. So with this announcement, they also nerfed it in Alchemy. They kind of made it so that if you target something over the a casting cost of 4 or more, it costs, you don't get the learn ability. And then the reason behind it is because it's kind of one of those things that disrupts and allows, the mono blue deck or the control deck to kind of, start soft locking the game out, preventing your opponent from really casting spells. And the other thing about this card too is the learn ability is it kind of replaces the Divide by Zero. Sure, there's not really a card that you can put in your learn board that's going to replace Divide by Zero, but you kind of you cast this and you kind of refill your hand back up with another card to maybe follow up with or cast on your following turn, like Environmental Sciences, or possibly even the card to draw cards if you have less cards than your opponents have in their hand. So overall, like, Divide by Zero makes sense here, and with them banning All Runs Epiphany, the other idea behind the reason was that they don't want like the Leer decks and then the Crab decks to kind of overtake because of Divide by Zero and Fade and Hope being the 1-2 combo to kind of block your opponent out from really doing anything. And then the last card here that is like the surprise that I think caught a lot of people off guard, but it was kind of one of those things you kind of saw the writing on the walls when they first introduced Alchemy, just like All Runs Epiphany, that they nerfed the card. They realized on how strong, a 3 snow mana card was. That was a 4/3 with Vigilance, allowing you to kind of, in a monocolored deck, be able to play this card fairly easily because you were able just to play untapped Snowlands and this card as well. If your opponent board wipe, you still have a 4/3 that you can, attack and then also use the mana to then do something else with. It also had all creature types, which I don't think what played a part of this. It's just an overall strong card, and it kind of nullified the idea of playing other creature lands, because if you think about it, out of all of them, this is probably the strongest for only costing 3 mana to activate, whereas I think the monocolored ones cost certain amounts of mana depending on what color, besides the green one where it's an X and a green, and I think X has to at least be 1, so at least a minimum of 2, but you're not getting as strong of a creature. You have to add in more mana to kind of even compete to get a 4/3. So it's kind of one of those things that I do see why it makes sense to kind of, take something away from the monocolored decks that are kind of predominant in the meta. But with that being said, I mean, the hardest hit here at the end of the day is the control decks, because they lost All Runs Epiphany, they lost Divide by Zero. The The aggro decks that played Faithless Haven lost a little bit, but they still have their other creature lands that they can play instead. They can go back to playing regular basics instead of playing snow mana. It's kind of one of those things I think helps diversify that kind of field. It's actually kind of interesting too if you actually look at the metagame for Standard currently at the moment. Mono White is now the most popular deck in Best of 1. I guess the Faceless Haven, again, using the Faceless Haven wasn't the biggest of deals as they just kind of replaced it with other things. You just go to the creature land as being kind of like that late game flyer that could possibly get in for that final points of damage, but the overall strength of cards in Mono White really wasn't impacted. Mono Green was probably hit a little bit harder. It's not as popular as it was. It's probably still up there with strength of deck because it has big creatures that can just overwhelm your opponent before they can really even respond. So that's where Green kind of still has that effect. But it kind of feels like these nerfs or bans actually in the Standard format is kind of to open the door for the new Champions of Kamigawa cards that are slowly coming out, because I do think that if they didn't do anything to the Standard format, that Kamigawa would come and it would go and nothing really would change. Maybe just the addition of adding a few of the new cards to some of the decks that already perform fairly well. It's gonna be kind of one of those things that based on these bans that happen in Standard, kind of where they go. I understand there's other things that kind of happened in other formats, but this is more so talking about Standard and the bans and how they impacted that. And then on top of this, they also did some some nerfs and buffs to things in Alchemy, which I'll probably do in a different video. But with that being said, if you like this video, hit that like button. It definitely helps out a lot. If you're new here, want to know I post new videos on the channel, hit that subscribe button. And that being said, I'll see you in the next video.